Right, so we're going to talk about mitigation effectiveness, inconsistencies, and opportunities to fine-tune with data. Tom Bills has been around forever, it sounds like. Last half of his career with the Buffalo Field Office. And then Duane is recently moved to state office, correct? All right, so let's welcome Tom and Duane.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I'd like to start off by thanking the Campbell County Commissioners for continuing to host this symposium to deal with these issues. And so after listening to the discussions today, bridging science, policy, and Tom and I really want to get down to how do you really implement something on the ground. So one of the important pieces I thought was, I keep hearing about the inconsistency issues. So I thought that would be a really good starting point for us to start. So what I'd like to go through is the evolution of how BLM has come up with a lot of the raptor buffers and everything. And I'll start with the Buffalo Field Office as an example. For those of you who don't have a lot of active involvement with Buffalo Field Office, the Resource Management Plan was completed in September of 2015. And as we started preparing that and wrangling through how we come up with and select an alternative, we realized that raptors were going to be one of the big issues, because raptor management has definitely evolved over the years in BLM documents. And you can see an evolution as we progressed. A lot of places started in with fixed buffers, fixed timing for all the species lumped together. I'm going to move forward from a Wyoming perspective and go to the Casper Field Office. Casper was completed, I believe, around 2007, and they made, at the time, probably a pretty radical move in that they broke out in between a quarter-mile and a half-mile buffer and segregated out some timing and some species issues. Then I want to fast forward 7 years later to the Buffalo RMP. And so why did we feel the need to come up with different buffers? Well, as a starting point, thanks to a lot of the people in this room, whether you're oil and gas, mining, realty right-of-way program, we had an immense amount of data. When you put the map up on the wall showing all the nests, it looks like you've shot, Campbell County with a shotgun. There are nests all over that place. And we realized that a very simple circle with a controlled surface, circle and a timing limitation was not going to be an adequate mechanism to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So we decided to very clearly and early work with the Fish and Wildlife Service using their suggested list of buffers and timing, because it gave us a lot of latitude, we thought, for the varying species we saw around here. Now, did we know using that we were going to run into challenges? Yes, we did, because when you see the ferruginous hawk buffer is a mile, is that correct, Tom? When you see that mile, you know you're going to have a lot of things to work with. So I talk about the inconsistencies because I hear that all the time. You're going to cross a boundary and go, gosh, Buffalo is this way, Casper is this way, Newcastle is this way. We recognize that reality, and so when I get done with my few notes here, Tom's going to go into the reality of how you deal with raptors effectively and coming up with a plan. But I wanted to hit that as one of the starting points, because you are going to see inconsistencies between the offices, but I'm going to suggest that most of the time, when you start working with BLM on the real project level and get into the specifics, I think we're going to be amazingly consistent on how we deal with that, because the reality of the project's going to come into play. So I want to hit another point. Hopefully I'm in order, probably not, is that we talk about effectiveness. And for me, when we really talk about effectiveness, I'm going to break it into two parts here. There's two aspects that when we made the RMP decision that need to be addressed. So, as I mentioned earlier, Tom can maybe go into more detail, or he's going to go into some examples there, is we've got the buffers and we've got timing. And for me, as a field manager who is not a biologist, what did that provide me? That provided me what I needed to do from that resource management plan aspect, is that if we implement those, then we're not going to have significant impacts, and we can move forward as we do that. So that significant impacts and that cumulative effects for all of our actions, that's a real key issue that we really haven't talked about. We've talked a lot about here is how do you deal with exceptions, how do you move things, etc. But the reality for me is every time, Tom being our NEPA coordinator, that he gets a document, we are outlining that we're in line with those cumulative impacts. So by having those buffers, implementing them at that broad level, we have that assurance. Now, moving forward then, as we get to a project level, we're dealing with exceptions, and Ryan brought up, do we have discretion? I'm going to argue that all the BLM offices are using that discretion every day. And how are they doing it? As I mentioned, you look at Campbell County, if you plotted every circle for everything, there's hardly any open holes out there. But the reality of it is, we've got wildlife biologists that are out on the ground. I'll pick on Wyatt. When Wyatt goes out there, Wyatt's starting point is that he doesn't look at that map and go, wow, there's not one circle we can go through, reject it, see you next year, etc. He knows the reality of it is there are physical barriers out there, there are other things, there are unoccupied nests, there are abandoned nests. So he's out there every day using his discretion to weave around to avoid the real occupied nests. So I feel like that discretion is really implemented fairly well. But when does it not work? It's when we've got these bigger projects and we're trying to get into a level of certainty on how we move forward into the future. And I'll let Tom talk about that. But the last thing I want to say is that the reason that the science aspect is interesting to me, as I said, I'm not a wildlife biologist, so I don't understand most of it. But the key things for me is that we have the data to keep showing me that we're not exceeding the cumulative impacts, let alone dealing with the little buffer issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But that really is a key thing for keeping the monitoring going a lot of times there, because most of these are not a one and done thing there that, yeah, we did that, we're moving on. Most of us are expecting that we're going to have the level of activity out there where we need to keep track of cumulative impacts and understand what we're having, because as I said earlier, almost every project comes in with a level of discretion, because you look at the map, it's rare that you can have a project with not a single buffer hitting it, a road or whatever it is. So keeping in mind for all of us, even though I know it's expensive to keep gathering that data, the real key that we got to keep our eye on is, are we doing all right with our overall cumulative impacts, to keep that in mind. And that's what I find the data is really useful for me. I don't understand it most of the time, but the biologist can at least bring it to me and explain, and then I can grill them that, hey, well, I think this could be a take. Well, that sets a pretty high standard. You got to document why you're doing it and tying it in with what the RMP said. Because one thing we came up with was we hit this raptor stuff, and we really ran into a struggle. How do we do it? Do we do it as, for our lingo, a controlled surface use, which you put a buffer around it and you try and move within that and timing? Or do we operate that these are no surface occupancy and you're getting an exception every time? And we didn't feel like the public would accept that very well, particularly up here where we're split estate. So we as an office made a decision that we think we can effectively manage these, for the most part, there's a few little exceptions there, as controlled surface use, because we can work together and come up with enough data to avoid or at least meet the goals and objectives of what we have in the plan. So I think I hit my notes, and I'll let Tom go into the real nitty-gritty of how you do this at the project level.
Okay, thank you all. As Duane said, I'm the NEPA coordinator for the BLM Buffalo office. I've been in that role for 7-8 years, and then another 7-8 years before that, I was the lead biologist. That's kind of my background, where I'm coming from. I think when in Buffalo, we've done a lot of innovative things over the years. And I've been in a couple of projects I've been involved. We did a Fortification Creek Management Plan. I thought that was a pretty innovative plan where we were trying to manage elk, fragile soils, oil and gas, and several of the folks in this room, Ryan was a big piece of that, Eric over here was a big piece of that, and I think we did some pretty innovative things in that. Duane was mentioning a few of the things we did in the resource management plan, specifically with raptors, and so I guess the point I'm trying to make here is I think we are open and definitely interested in different options, innovative ideas, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that specifically with raptors and 3 different projects we got going on right now in the Powder River Basin area, and how they're looking at using data and coming up with some other ways or options for managing raptors. Before I get into that, I want to back up and hit the data piece again a little bit. Yesterday we had some real good discussions on a standardized data form and standardized database, and I asked a question or tried to make an observation and asked a question or two on that, and I guess there were some questions on, all right, does Tom not support it, or does BLM not support it? And I just want to make sure it's understood. We do fully support it. Now, I was sitting here at the 2015 symposium and leading up to this one, questioning it a little bit, because I was sitting back saying, hey, we in the Powder River Basin, we already did this. We had a group called the Powder River Basin Interagency Working Group back in the methane days. And some of the folks, Tim Byer was on that, all the agencies were on this panel yesterday, were part of that. And we did have a standardized data form and database and survey protocols. And so I was like, why do we need to reinvent the wheel? Well, we do need to reinvent the wheel. There's always improvements that can be made. How many different tires are there? You got street tires, you got off-road tires, you got winter tires, you got studded tires. So, things can always be improved upon, and that's what I think we got out of that panel and those discussions yesterday is, Powder River Basin, you guys, you had a good example, but it was methane. It was one industry. It was, there's other things out there as well. There's a statewide need. There's differences in, as I was bringing up earlier, there's regional differences. Things are different in Teton County versus Campbell County. So, yes, we totally support those efforts, and we want to participate in them, and I think, the Buffalo Field Office would love to take it to forum and work with it and get the data in the database for Gary. All right, so that's my plug. Yes, we do fully support that effort. And what does that get you? We already talked about that question a little bit. The more data you have, the more options you have, the more things you can do. So I'm going to talk about 3 different plans, as I said a little bit ago, that we got going on right now that are kind of looking at managing raptors, but not, they all use the timing limitations, but they're also looking at other methods as well. There's lots of there's some differences in these plans, and that's kind of what I want to hit. To start with, so a couple of plans are still proposed. So I'm going to not so much use the names of them, but anyone that's involved is going to know them right away. So two of them are proposed. One's in place. The other thing I wanted to mention about one of the similarities of the plan and one of the misnomers is, we've heard the term a couple times today about year-round drilling, and the companies are using that term quite a bit. Well, that term is kind of a misnomer. Yes, one of the things the companies are asking for is they would like to do some activities during some of the timing limitation periods, but they're not asking to do it at every location, at every well. It's not a whole blanket thing. Where they're looking to do it is very site specific. One of the plans I kind of think of is a volume approach. One of the plans is looking at, they want to get as many proposals approved as they can. All right, and then as you're approaching the timing limitation period, they'll go send their biologists out, survey the area, figure out where birds are and where birds are not, and that's their kind of approach. So once they figure out where the birds are not, those are the wells they want to drill. All right, so that's kind of one approach. That's kind of a volume approach. Another approach, and that's a one company approach. That's another difference between a couple of these. Two of these projects are one company approaches, which gives you gives you some more flexibility. Third is a multi-company approach. So then you got to get all these different companies agreeing on how are we going to do things. And that particular plan, that's a very programmatic approach. So they're very early. Gary had a slide up here kind of talking about planning down towards, planning, sites selection he had on there, and then operations. So that first one I talked about, the volume approach, they're down on this end here of the site specific and the operations phase of it. This Next plan, they're way back here on the planning stages. They got all these companies, they have all these leases, they don't know where they want, this well or that well yet. So they're taking an approach, they're looking at this migratory bird plan as just setting up an umbrella of what data do we need, what information do we need, how do we go about making one of these little plans so that, when I'm going to site a well over here, I know what data I need to collect, and so I can make my plan to maybe look at something different. Maybe I can, do a half-mile buffer versus a three-quarter-mile buffer or whatever, whatever approach you might want to take with that location. So that's kind of how the second plan is worked out. The third plan is taking a territory approach. I think this is a very innovative approach. This is an approach that requires, they've got like 5 years of effort right now into collecting data for it, but that 5 years gives them a lot more flexibility as well too. So, they've got doing some radio telemetry, so they know where the birds are. They know what nests have been used each year, so they know the most active nests, least active nests, what are the alternate nests. They know where the foraging areas are, and so we can use that data, working with that company, working with the Fish and Wildlife Service. We can design some very specific plans on how to mitigate that particular project, how to site a well. One of the things I like to use with that particular project is, through the radio telemetry work they've been doing, they, as I said, they know the foraging areas. An example is, so they have a territory that's kind of got a north-south orientation, and it actually jumps over another territory. So it's got a kind of bimodal. There's a southern area here where the nest is, so that's a high-use area. Then it kind of jumps over to the north, and it's got its prime foraging area up here where there's a prairie dog colony. But then in the middle there's an east-west kind of territory. So, if we're using our old traditional nest timing limitation approach, we could very easily site a well or site some other project up here in the north end where that foraging area is, because we'll have we got no clue basically that foraging area is there, except for, the work that they have done. So, to me, that's a limitation of the timing limitations, and an example of where a little bit of effort, a little bit of data collection, we've got a lot more flexibility. We know how to work with that particular pair. We know we've got that foraging area up there, the nest here. We got a better idea how to protect it. Let me kind of hit some of the other similarities and differences between these projects. Okay, this symposium is about raptor, but these plans we're working on, they're not raptor specific. They're looking at trying to conserve migratory birds, from the songbirds, passerines, all the way up. A couple of them are looking at prey-based surveys. We talked about prey-based a little bit this morning. So 2 of the projects, that's a component of them, is collecting that data. All of them are looking at trying to avoid and minimize impact. So, first place, by collecting nest location data, you know where the nests are. Can you stay out of that buffer altogether? And, as Duane said, a lot of times in this area it's difficult, but that is definitely the first step. And all these projects use that approach to avoid, minimize, work down the mitigation hierarchy. A couple other approaches. 2 of these projects, the 2 company-specific ones, they're doing strictly horizontal drilling, and they're also doing extended laterals. They're not just going out for a few hundred feet. Both of these companies are taking their wells as far as a 2-mile lateral. So, that can extend. You can have 4 miles between wells on a north-south direction. So, a lot more, protecting that foraging habitat, just, a lot less fragmentation. So that's an approach 2 of these projects are using. Another thing kind of along that line. Okay, oops, sorry, I wasn't watching over there. So I'll just cut it off there. If you got some questions afterwards too, come talk to us, but